Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Eclectrocasts. This is Eclectrocast number 21, and today we're talking with Isotherme. Isotherme is the artist name of Jeff Kern, and Jeff is going to put out his new album on February the 22nd, 222. And I am talking with him today with our guest host, Kim Rueger. Hi, Kim.
Hello.
All is well, I hope, after a lot of late night or early morning tennis.
Yes. A lot of sleepless nights, but I'm all happy for it.
Great. And how are you, Jeff?
I'm well, thank you. Happy to be here.
Good to have you here. So let's begin talking a little bit about where are you going to put out this album? Where is it going to be available? Tell us a little bit about where people are going to be able to listen to it and purchase it.
Sure. Silence of the Second Voice is going to be available on Bandcamp, my Bandcamp site, Isotherme's Bandcamp site, on February 22nd. I'm also going to be printing up physical CDs, so they will be available as well, hopefully at that time. Mm-hmm. And I'm exploring the possibility of doing something with CD Baby. So CD Baby may have downloads and physical CDs, and also Amazon and iTunes and Spotify and things like that. They'll all be in the mix too. They might not be in the mix by the 22nd, but they'll eventually be there too. Yeah.
But on the 22nd, it will be on Bandcamp
for sure. On Bandcamp, okay. Absolutely.
And you're going to do a physical CD?
Yeah, I wanted to do a physical CD with this one. I like something in my hands that way. You know what I mean? Something that almost something that signifies an event. To me, I wanted a physical representation of this so that my kids, 20 years from now can say, "Oh wow, this is something that made Dad happy. This is Dad at his happiest." Doing, and they can enjoy it or not, but at least they'll have it. At least they'll have something that represents Dad doing something that really made him happy. And that's and you don't get that with a digital file. You really don't.
No, you always need some sort of device to have that, right? And what fun is it to walk around with a device and what my dad is on this little stick or whatever it will be 10 years from now.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know. Yes. And I've heard a lot of people talking about just that idea of the physical release, the experience of just paging through either their albums or their CDs. There's kind of a sensation to it that is much more obviously visceral since you're touching something, but just much more pleasurable than, say, like browsing through your library file on your computer. So just the experience of kind of going through your music, going through your collection, having something physical there. I think that ties into the resurgence of, albums, vinyl, and also tape now, cassettes.
Yep.
Is just that idea of having that physical product, even though we can do everything digitally these days.
Yeah, I agree, Kim. I think that something that I enjoyed doing when I was growing up, I still enjoy going to record stores and spending a couple hours, just poking around, whether I buy something or not. And I think a lot of us, especially people of a certain age, like us and even older, who really sat with, Kees, you sat with your Deep Purple album in 1976 and you looked at the cover art, and I did the same thing with Rush and Aerosmith and Genesis, and you'd find all these great little things on the album cover, and you'd read the liner notes and you'd read the lyrics, and it made for a lot more complete experience, I think, And obviously I don't have any lyrics to my music, so I'm not going to have any lyrics printed in the CD. But still, it gives that extra level of, I think, pride for me in a way, to have something physical, especially to so that my kids, family, whatever, can also say, yeah, this was Dad, and he used to like doing this stuff, and he used to drag us into record stores, and we used to be bored as hell, but this is what it was about.
They'll come around.
Yeah, I hope so.
This album has sort of been brewing, if you will, for a couple of years, right? And I remember, like, somewhere around November, you sort of got the bug to put it together as an album, as a complete album, as a narrative, if you will. And there is a clear narrative in your album. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the whole journey then?
Yeah. It actually started quite a bit earlier than November, though November is really when it started to take shape. And I think you're right about that, Case. But I don't know if you remember, Case, but you and I had a conversation maybe in April or May of last year. And you had asked, so, what are you working on? And, it was all like after Nail was finished and you had finished your Laundry tapes, and we were kind of, exchanging ideas on, hey, where are you going to go next, etc. And I've been playing around with the idea of reflection. And I remember a conversation that you and I had about reflection.
Yes.
And I said, yeah, I've got 2 songs that are called Reflection something or other. And you had said, oh, so you're going to have Reflection 1, Reflection 2, stuff like that. And I said, no, not really. But actually it ended up working out like that, but not labeled as such. But so, the idea of reflection was a part of my musical thematic thinking for a lot of last year. And that led me to the idea of genuflection. And genuflection has, to me, a lot of different connotations. Most obviously, the Catholic Church uses the term genuflect, and maybe other, maybe Protestant divisions also, I don't know, but use the term genuflection when you kind of kneel in front of a figure, the cross or something like that, But I didn't want to take it so literally like that, though I am attracted to kind of spooky religious ideas. I like that stuff. But I'm not particularly religious person, but I like that sort of
the
mysticism.
narrative.
Yeah.
But I thought of the idea of reflection and genuflection as genuine reflection. What is our genuine reflection? What is, what do we see in the mirror? What is real? What is not? What do we bow down to? What do we genuflect in front of?
Right.
And that whole concept is in a lot of different sociological and even religious perspectives as well.
Right.
The term namaste is very much similar. Kind of, I bow to the divine within you. I recognize the life force within you, etc. And it can go in a lot of different directions. And so for a while I was contemplating, well, should I call the album Genuflection or not? And, but I came up, that led me to another idea about our inner voices and what do our inner voices say and what comes out and what doesn't come out. So if you could think of, and I'm not a sociologist, but if you could think of your thoughts and feelings and impulses and maybe even dreams, everything inside you as the first voice, the second voice would actually be action or a manifestation of that. We all go on autopilot, et cetera, for, whatever. But for the most part, anything that comes out of our mouths has been felt or thought first, even, a split second before most of the time. So that to me was the second voice. So what is the silence of the second voice? What are those things that we see in ourselves, that we feel, that we think, that we can't express? Maybe outwardly they're evident in our facial expressions or our actions or our behavior, sometimes in our words, but what can't we say? How do we hold our tongues and why? Is it out of fear? Is it out of tact? Is it out of respect? And it's a combination of all those things sometimes. And sometimes it's not necessarily a failure to communicate, but it's rather what happens to those thoughts and feelings when they can't be expressed. Do they brew inside you? And it leads to a lot of different things. It leads to, people will go through stress. People will not be able to cope, who sometimes can't express themselves or feel they can't express themselves. And again, I'm not a sociologist, so these are just thoughts of mine that I kind of had developing as I put together some of the tracks and some of the ideas.
Well, I really recognize that in some of the pieces that we're going to be listening to, sort of that contrast between that, what happens inside versus what comes out, and then if it's repressed, and then when it does come out, then it can be pretty feisty and harsh and loud. And there are a couple of really interesting tracks on your album that make that very clear. Who are you? Genuflecting literally means to bend through the knee, right? Genou in French means knee, and flexion means to bend. So who are you bowing to in your album? Are there some influences that you're bowing to? Are there particular artists or people you are bowing to? Are you bowing to your family? Are you bowing to your children?
Well, in a general sense, I think I'm using the concept of genuflection as pretty much as I indicated before. It's like a bow to the life force or the spirit or the divine in something or something else. It's humility, really, and that I think the world lacks humility sometimes, especially these days. But the track genuflection, as regards the specific track genuflection, it really is inspired by two minimalist contemporary composers, Philip Glass and Steve Reich, and I've enjoyed their work for a long time. But it's only been within the past year or two that I've actually paid attention more closely to what's going on in how a minimalist composer starts an idea and develops an idea and carries it out. So one of the albums actually that I really like from Philip Glass is called The Photographer. And the second movement of The Photographer really inspired me in the creation of Genuflection, the track. And if you listen to that, you'll probably hear a little bit of a similar vibe. And also Steve Reich with a lot of his extended pieces. One in particular is one that came out a couple years ago called The Daniel Variations. And the Daniel Variations he wrote for Daniel Pearl. You may remember Daniel Pearl was the journalist who was beheaded in the Middle East.
Yes.
And he wrote a piece around that. And Daniel Pearl was actually not only a journalist, but he was a violinist too. So there's a lot of focus on the violin in Steve's homage to Daniel, etc. So, I guess through the music and the development of the music, Genuflection is a bow to those two guys, who have really influenced a lot of what I feel I try to pursue as a composer. And you guys will probably recognize this. You guys have both been familiar with my music for a while on how I, start with certain melodies and develop them and repeat and enhance and pile other melodies on top, etc. And I think that some of that comes from Steve Reich and Philip Glass, without a doubt.
Well, let's listen to Genuflection, and then when we come back, let's talk a little bit more about this idea of first and second voices, and how you provide a narrative around 4 reflections. I think your album has 4 reflections.
It does. Okay, great.
So, everybody, we're going to take a listen to Genuflection, which is a track from the new album by Isotherme. The album is called Silence of the Second Voice. This is Genuflection.
One of the things that we were talking about earlier, you were talking about that difference between the first voice, the inner thought, and the second voice, the action. And one of the things, even before you had said anything about that, you sent us some notes on the album a couple of days ago talking about this. But even before that, when I listened through it, I heard in the arrangements the conflict. And one of the things that carried, even though you I believe, wrote many of the songs over a period of time. So you didn't sit down and write them all together or arrange them all together. But one thing that I found that was continuous through a lot of the songs were that you had these differing elements. Quite often you have these lovely, lush, lilting kind of pad sounds, some of them with what I characterize as the isotherme sound, an English horn that's in there with a pad. There are some things which I like. I like the fact that you have a particular sound. I hear that and I go, there's Jeff, there's isotherme. But sometimes you have that lilting voice that's happening, and then you introduce something that's distorted or percussive. And it seems like there's a conversation between the two because you don't have the lilting pad back off. One doesn't take over the other. They both happen simultaneously as though they're in a discussion or perhaps even an argument. I kind of heard that throughout several of the songs, and I was wondering if that's tied into your whole theme with the conflict, perhaps sometimes about expressing the second voice.
That's a good question, Kim. Great observation. I don't think I can honestly say I did it purposefully on every track. There is one track that I did purposefully attempt to have a number of contrasting voices, almost in an argument. Mm-hmm. But for the other tracks, it kind of happened instinctively, maybe, or intuitively, or that was the vibe that I was feeling inside. So that's what came out.
Okay.
And Kim, I think you're right. And this comes through in a few of the tracks in different ways too, now that I look back at it, especially like the opening track on the album, which is called Reflection Firstborn, which is about my son.
That was definitely where I first heard it. For sure. And then it carried into the other songs, one of them being Petite Âmes, that did stand out to me in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that obviously my children are the loves of my life as well as my wife's life too. But I think that there's a duality there. I can love my children more than anything else, but I'm also deathly afraid of something that could possibly happen to them, Mm-hmm. So there's not only a love connection, there is a fear connection too. And as that track, Reflection Firstborn, builds, you have the childlike melodies that are really usurped by a lot more of a masculine sort of approach with the snare drum and the bass drum and the harpsichord and the mellotron that builds and builds and builds. And that to me was an indication of, I could easily lose grasp of this 8-year-old boy.
So to me, that track was more about your awareness of fatherhood, of being a father. It's maybe not so much about your son. It is about your own inner voice of fatherhood.
That's absolutely right, Kate.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point. And another thing that ties in that I thought of when the snare drums especially come in was the idea of toy soldiers. And that's, an experience that children go through when they go through this very innocent period, and then they continue on. And as they continue on, elements that are maybe not so pretty of the real world enter their lives, a lot of times through toys, a lot of times through fairy tales. And toy soldiers would be one of the ways, kind of the militaristic feel. And especially, characteristically for boys, not saying that boys only, but that kind of led me into that contrast right there when the snare really kind of kicks in that song of the boy that's growing up and kind of experiencing the world. And so I guess that ties into exactly what you were talking about, the duality of the comfort and the love, and then expressing the fear as he kind of grows up and goes into the world, I would expect.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. And both of you, thank you so much for that, because I think you both have seen two different perspectives, but the same idea that I expressed. And again, it wasn't, some of that it was purposeful, but you're giving a different dimension to it that was probably, somewhat instinctive of mine. So
So you brought up earlier your track Petite Âme, Little Souls, and I was assuming that you were initially talking about children's souls, but little soul can also mean somebody with a little soul is like a cowardy person, and that's sort of how I interpreted. Like when I listened to the music, there was such a, it's my favorite track of your whole album. I've listened to it several times, and I can't get enough of it, really. But what I wanted to ask you, I think in that track, I think you give wonderful expression to what happens when a second voice is silenced and then it finally finds a way out. And when it comes out, it can be very feisty and aggressive and angry, because it's been cooped up all this time. So how is that a culturally bound phenomenon? So, for example, in the United States, where we all three of us live here, there's enormous cultural emphasis on individualism and freedom of expression. And yet, there are all these people walking around with cooped up things. And then when it comes out, and it's, right now in the political debates, you see some extreme examples of people giving expression to their second voice. So in what sense does your track sort of emphasize that? And do you see a connection with the culture you live in?
Maybe. I hadn't thought about that. I started Petite Âmes as to be a conversation with a bunch of different voices. Some of them are real voice samples, but most of them are instrument parts. And that conflict was purposeful, but it didn't necessarily have any kind of sociological representation inside it. I wasn't thinking sociologically, but I was thinking about that inner conflict, though. How people fight to be heard. And I think you're very perceptive in that case, where you say that, we all cherish our freedom of expression, yet so many people walk around with their tongues tied and and they can't say it. And that is the whole concept of Silence of the Second Voice, even though I kind of bring it out a little bit more, probably obviously through, the story of a 5-year-old girl, and the relationship with her brother, but in another track. But I do see that in Petite Âmes, and I just think that conversation was meant to be such that it got a little violent, and it did turn out a little violent in the musical, I guess the drama that developed out of it, where it would build a little bit, and that metallic sound was then enhanced with an orchestral bass drum and crash cymbals to kind of give it a little bit more of, maybe give it more teeth,
But it almost has that angels and demons sense, there's medieval sense to it.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting.
Which goes back to that whole, tie-in with little bits of religious tones kind of throughout, with the reflection and the genuflection too. It kind of, I don't know if you wrote that around the same time as any of those, but it still ties into that theme, which I think is also an ongoing theme with your previous album, Nail, and so maybe just throughout your music, Jeff.
Yeah, probably a field day for an analyst.
I do find some elements in your music that speak to what you're saying. So, for example, in Petite Âme, you begin with this urgent rhythm, this insistent knocking, like somebody is knocking on a door. Dunk, dunk, dunk. So there isn't a rhythmic urgency in some of your work. In some of your past work, and I've had the fortune to sort of witness your development over quite some time. You got attention for your music to very sweet, beautiful, sticky melodies. I mean, you are a master at creating melodies that stick in your head.
Thank you.
And in a pleasant way, there are melodies that stick in your head in very unpleasant ways. I can tell you that, but not yours. But in this album, more than any other work you've done so far, you begin a lot of tracks with like urgent rhythms. And so you're getting attention for that second voice that way, you know, like that knocking on the door, listen to me, listen to me. Is that a conscious process or?
No, not at all. No, not at all. It isn't at all, but Kees, I think that's a fantastic revelation to me. And I love that you interpret it like that.
I think it's a musical way of like calling attention, right? So you can call attention in an urgent way, but you can also call attention to whatever you have to say in sort of a sweet, sort of a, you know, sort of in the background, sweet kind of way, which is what a lot of your music, past music has done. More atmospheric, you know?
Yeah, I think that's true. And, you know, I don't consider myself an straight ambient musician because you know ambient music works on some of the same levels that mine does, but with ambient music, you know, the atmosphere is everything and how things evolve over time. And there's not as much focus on melody and maybe a little bit more on rhythm, underlying rhythm, but not so much in your face rhythm. But I need melody. I absolutely need melody, and melody is part of everything I can do. Even in like Petites Âmes, which doesn't have a memorable melody, yet it is, as you say, overtaken with that rhythmic aspect. And and it's just trying to get some variety in there, I think. Of you know what I bring to music, if anything. You know, trying to get certain aspects out in different ways.
And I hope we got everybody really curious about Petite Âme.
Yeah.
Let's listen to it. It is my most favorite track of this album. Not that I don't like the other tracks, but I really, really, really like this. So I hope everybody else does. So we're going to listen to a track from Isotherme's new album that's going to be out February 22nd of this year. It's called Petite Âme, and it's from the album Silence of the Second Voice, Petite Âme. So wasn't that great? I just love that knocking on the door, and then with those breathing parts sort of panning, through the stereo field. It's eerie, man. It is eerie. It's so good.
Thank you. I put a lot of that track together with the Alchemy, formerly Camel Audio, now owned by Apple. Alchemy software. And, there are a couple sound libraries that I only have on my Alchemy Mobile with my iPad.
That leads me into something I had overall about your style and your expression as Isotherme, your arrangements, is that you combine, it's very noticeable that you combine classical instruments. We talked about English horn and timpanis in one of your songs, and strings, but not synthesized strings, more classical or sampled strings, combined with these electronic elements. Is that a sound that you set out ahead of time to kind of combine those two in a very specific way? Or is that something that kind of evolved naturally, partly because of maybe some of your background? Or do you think of it even at all? Is it just something that naturally comes together?
I think it evolves track by track. We have crutches as musicians. We have sounds that we are familiar with that we like to go to. And I think that, using classical instrument samples is almost like a crutch to me in a way, because if I'm playing with a couple new sounds, right, where I really don't have as much control over them, or I'm not as familiar with them or something, I'll often go to other instruments to fill out, that are a little bit more familiar, to fill out the arrangement or to add something different. And I have software made by the UVI company called UVI Orchestral Suite. There is better software out there for these sounds, but UVI Workstation Orchestral Suite is actually pretty good. You have a lot of control over a lot of aspects of each instrument, whether it's a trill on a flute or a straight tone. It could be voices. There are voices on there where they're singing different vowels and syllables. And obviously, with any good software, you have control over, like the amplitude and the filter envelopes, and I like messing it up a little bit. Sometimes I like taking a violin sound and that sounds so beautiful and pure when it's used the way maybe it was designed to be used, and throwing it through a gate or something so that, I adjust the threshold and make it sound like it's disintegrating or something like that, So so a lot of the sounds that might sound like they weren't classical instruments are probably that way, and they began that way anyway, so.
Yeah. It's interesting because you were saying crutch earlier, and to me, it's not, some people, I understand exactly what you're talking about, because I have the same go-to sounds. Quite often I compose on a piano sound first for many different things, or have a particular pad or two that I kind of start working things out on at first. But to me, it's not so, I see it or hear it not so much as a crutch, but as something that is the isotherm sound that to me distinguishes, again, with your chord progressions and your melodies, distinguishes who you are as an artist. That is a consistent thing that might be subconscious through your different works that kind of comes out. So I definitely think of it as a benefit. A pro rather than a con.
Thank you.
Just to put my little 2 cents in there about that.
Thank you.
But
I enjoy
like
using them. I enjoy using them. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Jeff, I assume that many of the strategies and techniques that you talked about sort of come out, for example, in the track that we're going to be listening to in a bit called Clipping the Choral. And, throughout your album, here and there, you use voices. I assume that those now that I hear you talk, those are sampled voices. Yes?
Yep, all of them.
In Clipping the Choral, I think the voices that you use there, I think reveal another theme in your music. And I think it's a theme of seduction. I mean, while Clipping the Choral has a lot of elements in common with Petite Âme, the gentle parts contrasted with the heavy distortion.
They certainly are.
Distorted parts. But the voices are, like in your notes you send in Clipping the Coral, the voices are like pleading sirens, but sirens are not pleading, right? Sirens are seducing. The original idea is the sirens seduce the sailors to take a different course. But I found this theme of seduction, throughout your music, and like we talked about earlier, some of the seduction is done through sweetness, for a lack of better word, but through melody. But I think in this album there is a lot more seduction through energy. Yeah, bringing, like you're almost saying, like speak out that speak up, say what you're feeling, say what you're thinking, say what you want to do. So can you talk a little bit about, I have a feeling that you haven't thought about your own music as having a theme of seduction, but does that seem to be, in retrospect, an element of your work?
It could be. Maybe I see it more as invitation. I think that is apparent in Clipping the Coral with those voices, and I kind of explain them as sirens, that whole mythological sirens of the sea.
Right.
And inviting the person who is, the song's about drowning, and the person who is clipping the coral, who's trying to stay above water and losing, whose feet brush against this algae sort of smooth, comforting, light organism like a coral, trying to stay above water and knows he or she is losing and is going to go under. To hear that voice welcoming them, saying, you know what, it's not that bad. Just give up, surrender, just let it go, and you're going to join us, or something like that. So it's almost like an invitation.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant with the word seduction. Yeah. Because I think that's kind of like, from the mythical point of view, that was exactly the idea of the sirens, right? Is to lure them to their demise, but that doesn't seem such a bad thing. So it's a little bit more than an invitation then, right?
Yeah.
It is,
maybe. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Surrender.
Yes, a surrender. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking specifically on the arrangement in that particular song, it's interesting hearing you talk about it because, you have the distorted rhythmic parts, which again kind of play into what I was talking about earlier. You have the lilting parts that are about equally as loud as the distorted rhythmic parts throughout the song. But then as you progress, there's this beating, distorted lower kick drum that comes in that really brings in an insistence towards the end of the song that kind of is exactly what you're talking about, the leading, the seduction, and then the seduction is kind of too hard to resist once you get to the end of it. And that insistent lower sound is really kind of what symbolized that for me, definitely.
Yes. And that's because, you're not just doing it through sweet melody,
right.
You're also doing it through very energetic elements like the distorted elements.
Yeah.
And you talked earlier about when I was listening to Deep Purple, what was seductive about listening to Deep Purple was exactly that energy, that, that, and what is attractive to heavy metal or to maybe hip hop for people is that invitation, that seduction through energy, through distortion, through harsh elements. And it might be, like sort of fringe adolescent elements that still linger around in us, no matter how old we are.
Well, is it adolescent really if we still have those in us? I mean, it comes about in adolescence.
No, but I think during adolescence, that energy, that kind of that becomes very seductive, right?
That's true.
I think.
But it stays with us, I think, throughout.
Absolutely.
I mean, for a lot of people. I mean, it comes of age at that time, but it continues throughout our life and continues to call us still.
Well, I'm excited that we get to this point because this is something that I think is a part of my second voice that I'm not always comfortable giving expression to, but I still listen to Deep Purple.
And why not? Why not?
I have DVDs
albums.
and it gives me that exact same feeling as when I was 16 or 17.
Yeah.
It's very exciting. So hey, let's listen to Clipping the Coral. Clipping the Coral is a track from Jeff's new album called Silence of the Second Voice. Here's Clipping the Coral. Yeah, you know, I was almost wishing that I still had long hair. I had very long hair when I was a teenager. And you know, like you can bob your head back and forth and then the hair flies.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, your hair, when I met you back in 86, 85, 86 case, your hair was longish. It wasn't really
longish,
long.
I had hair to my hips, Jeff, when I was a teenager. Yeah.
My husband's...
It was like you remember the musical Hair? Hair was symbolizing freedom, independence when I was a kid. Yeah.
My husband has long hair, and he's serious about getting into the music for the evening or getting into the good time for the evening when the ponytail comes out and the long hair drapes about. And when he's a guitar player, and so when he plays guitar, he definitely he's an old Metallica fan too, so that might tell a little bit about him as well.
Awesome. So Jeff, your title track, your album title track is your last track. It's of the album. It's a little unusual. Usually a title track is a little bit more upfront in an album. So why did you place it at the end?
Oh, good question. No particular reason. I thought it was a good I thought it was a good summation of the entire album where a lot of the tracks had to do with, first of all, almost every track has vocal samples on it. So you have all these voices. You have little conversations going on. You have a short story about somebody who isn't able to express her voice, the 5-year-old girl, Karis, in L'Enfant Jumeau. And, I just thought that why not have the last track made up of all these voices that just sing out? And that's kind of, to me, that was a good period on the sentence of the album, or an exclamation point, really.
One of the things when I listened through the album before I had your notes on it, to me, it told a story. It told us a story of the conversation and the conflict. And when I got to the final song, the title song, it seemed not completely different, but very different from all the rest of it. It seemed almost like the song that would play at the end of the movie credits, as you just said, and that's why it's interesting to me to sum everything up. It was the story had ended, the peaks and the valleys had already happened, and then here was the thing to kind of tie it all together. So it's interesting that you just said that, because even just listening through it without knowing much about the background of the album, I felt that.
Yeah, and I wanted that to be almost a light. I think this album as a whole has a better mix of light and dark to it than Baby Nail did, and I wanted to end on a light note, and so I kind of chose that sort of ambient chill sort of atmosphere, which I haven't really done much in the past. This track I thought was very un-isothermish in some ways.
Yes, it's very different.
Just the feel of it anyway, with the rhythmic feel and the percussion.
Yeah.
But I kind of wanted to do that. I wanted to finish up the album with something light. I also the short reflection track before Silence of the Second Voice, the last track, is called Tantum Cordis, which is Latin for only heart. That to me was where the direction was really headed. Everything said in all the other tracks, fine, whatever. Now I'm only going to speak with my heart, and that's what led to Silence of the Second Voice being that light sort of chill ambient kind of groove with the voices together.
Yeah, and when I was listening to the album as a whole, that last reflection song that you were just talking about, to me seemed like the denouement, the resolution, the conflict has been resolved, the voices that you bring in, because it sounds like you have, I don't know if these were samples from the library, but it actually sounds like a field recording of around the house, some conversation may be happening within there, if I've got the right track.
In reflection,
I believe so,
Cordis?
yeah. Yeah.
A number of years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was up at 4 a.m. on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, and I went to the local shopping mall, and just because it's fun to do those things, I don't even have to buy anything. I just like watching all the madness, And this group of people were standing outside of one of the entrances to the mall waiting for it to open, and they were getting very rowdy because it wasn't open when they wanted it to be open. So I pulled out my phone and just took my, field recorder app and just hit record and recorded all their voices having this argument about when is the mall going to open. That's what that is. Has absolutely nothing to do with the theme of the song. I just thought it was kind of neat to, throw that in there.
Well, it's interesting because you put some production on that, maybe some LFOs and some filters. It kind of cuts in and out in a way that I couldn't. I didn't get the. I got the being in a crowd feel, but I didn't necessarily get the complete argument feel of it. And I guess maybe
I reversed the voices, Kim, so they're backwards. What you're hearing is backwards.
Okay. Yeah, because to me it was the resolution of kind of, and also maybe the name of the track led me to kind of think of discussion that might be happening in a home that was very, had a lot of people in it, kind of for a gathering, talking about things, which brought that whole kind of conflict of the different voices. And then with L'Enfant, you have the discussion between siblings and all that. It brought the home back to the end of the album for me when I was listening to it. So it's really interesting that's not. I kind of thought it might be of your family, like while you're getting dinner or something like that. So it worked perfectly.
Thank you. It's just atmospherics. I mean, if I look into it and I hear people arguing about a shopping mall, if that's what their only heart is, really arguing over when a shopping mall is going to open, then maybe their second voice should be silent.
Maybe.
I don't know. It was really just atmospherics. I wanted some crowd noise in there. Yeah.
So Jeff, in the notes you sent to us in email communication, you talked about how you are dedicating this album to Chris Squire, the bass player of the band Yes, who passed away about a half a year ago, I believe.
Yeah, I'm dedicated to Chris's memory. Chris Squire was quite a musical inspiration to me, being a great fan of the band Yes since I was a teenager, even before. But Chris succumbed to some kind of, I think it was some sort of leukemia in June on my son's birthday. As a matter of fact, he died on my son's birthday, which made it very bittersweet for me. But if you look at the rock band Yes and you think of John Anderson's lead vocal as the first voice, right? Not only was Chris Squire a virtuoso bass player, but he also had a very distinctive voice. Singing voice, which he was really the sound of the counterpoint, the vocal counterpoint to Yes. So he is the second voice. So his death really silenced the second voice.
Oh, wow.
Felt like I wanted to dedicate this album to his memory because to me he was the second voice. And he was silenced too soon, as most people are.
In a grander scale, your album is a genuflection, a bowing to Chris as well. Then
you could think of it that way. Yeah.
So let's listen to Silence of the Second Voice. How about it?
Oh, really? Yeah.
And so Silence of the Second Voice is the title track and last track on Jeff's new album, which will come out on February the 22nd on Bandcamp, both as a download and as a physical CD. So we're going to listen to Silence of the Second Voice.
guys had mentioned the vocal samples and how you thought they were very realistic, and who is that singing on that track, etc.
Yes,
Right,
especially
right.
the title track.
Yeah,
I thought it was Kim at first, So something that I didn't know about.
At the end of last year, I had met a person who is a film composer on Twitter, and she was telling me how she uses certain instruments from the East West Company, and I've always found them very pricey, and I've always stayed away because I can't afford to drop $800 on a plugin that gives me a violin sound. So
It'd be nice, but...
that they would probably use in real studios. So. But she had mentioned to me that there's something that this company does that's called Composer Cloud. And it's a subscription service where you pay $30 a month and you have a whole host of plugins and VST virtual instruments that you can download and use.
Yeah, because they have quality sounds. I think back in school, we had the East-West Library, and we're using them. So they've had a great reputation for quality samples for a long time.
At the heart of your album is a track called L'Enfant du Milieu, loosely translated as the middle child. You weren't a middle child by any chance, were you?
No, I'm the first of three.
Okay. But in that track, you actually speak your voice. You use your own voice. And your voice seems kind of hushed. It seems hushed in sort of an empathetic way towards the main character of the story, Karis, and in empathy to Karis's struggles in the story. And I was wondering if reading this by yourself has woken up feelings that you hadn't visited for a long time, because your voice, you can just hear your empathy, your deep empathy for this story, and particularly for this character. So what were your feelings when you were reading that, when you recorded it?
I wanted it to be intimate. I wanted it to be close, as most parents do. I have spent 8 years reading to my kids every night. My wife and I will read to our kids, both of them, every night. And have done for their entire lives, ever since they were, a couple months old, where they really probably didn't understand what we were saying, but still it's that voice, And I wanted it to be, and what I wrote was a short story, and I wanted to read a short story, and I didn't, what was I thinking when I was reading it? I wanted it to be as if somebody were next to me hearing a story about a little girl who loved her older brother so much, and she looked up to her older brother so much, and all she got from him was condescension and that hush, you don't know anything, stuff like that. And it meant so much to her to have a way to please him, or persuade him, or influence him, or just be accepted by him. And that's kind of,
Right.
Again, I'm not a sociologist. I've not studied middle child theory, but I think most of us would probably, from what we know, have seen or have heard, middle children tend to get caught in the middle. Obviously, the parents will probably, rely on an older child for certain things. They'll coddle the youngest child, and the middle one kind of gets lost in the shuffle. And I kind of wanted to express that with Karis's story on how, she's doing 5-year-old girl things. She's playing with her hair. She's looking at her reflection in a mirror, in a window. It's dark outside, so she can kind of see inside the window, what's going on inside the house, and her reflection in the window. She wanted to help her brother Will do a crossword that he was doing from the paper. And she's very naively giving suggestions to help him solve a problem, and he's just scornful towards her. And towards the end of the story, she figures out what the word is. He's looking for a 4-letter word that's used for pain. And right before she walks down the hall, she realizes what it is, and she knocks and tries to enter into his bedroom to tell him, I know what the word is. And she just has this sort of euphoric, her heart began to sprint because she found a way that she could really actually get through to him. And it goes unresolved. You never know what she says when when she opens the door at the end of the story. Their eyes locked. They were silent for once in her life. He looked up to her. That's what she wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And right. I see that with my own children. I see how, and even though I only have 2, I don't have 3. I see how my younger daughter looks up to my son, and how a lot of times she just wants to be accepted by him. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's hard, especially with boys. Boys, 8-year-old boys are, they're getting that macho thing going on, and and that's kind of where I was thinking. And I think a lot of that, seeing this sort of relationship sometimes, even though my children do have a very profound love for each other, seeing this sort of relationship in this way sometimes in their interactions, all of that went into my reading of the story.
Right. Yeah. And I could feel it. I mean, it is very, very apparent in your voice, and you didn't ask us to include this track, but I just can't see how not to include it, particularly writing out the show with it. Because to me, what you just talked about goes at the essence of everything we've talked about in this past hour. And I think this album, more than anything, is about you being a father.
Yeah.
Could be. It could be. I think both of you have mentioned that. Yeah.
Because that's your life. That's your life.
It is. It's my most important job. It really is right now, So thank you for that.
Good. Well, before we ride out with this track, there's one theme in your album that we haven't really talked about, and that is Earth, Wind, and Fire and Sky. No, what is it?
Yeah.
Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Yeah, and air.
Sky.
Yeah.
And air.
Yeah.
And so
the 4 elements kind of make an appearance in this album under different tracks.
Yes. Yeah. Not the band Earth, Wind, and Fire.
No. Oh my God.
You're not going to break into September, are you?
I love those guys.
Oh yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, so I just wanted to represent the 4 elements. They come out in, fire comes out in Reflection Fireglass. In Flora Absolute, which is about being in a garden, is the earth. If I Held the Clouds is the sky, and Clipping the Coral is the water. So it just adds another element to the album. That's all it is. Yeah.
And this was sort of like came together as you were composing.
Yeah, pretty much. Yep, because I saw that I had a song about drowning, and I had a song about flying and, holding the clouds. And then In Flora Absolute came about. And then Fireglass, I almost didn't include on the album. I actually had it as a leftover, but there was another track that I didn't come through. There was a track that I had done a demo of that I really liked, that I wanted to record properly for the album, and it just wasn't sounding great, and I just couldn't get it together. So I decided at the last minute to scrap that one, and then I re-added Reflection Fireglass. So I'm happy that's part of it now. One thing I wanted to mention really quickly is the bonus EP. As we had said before, Genuflection was directly inspired by Steve Reich and Philip Glass, and I think minimalist composition is very appealing to electronic composers because they can ride out on an atmosphere and let it develop over time. Before you know it, it's like 30 minutes long, right?
Right.
What I'm going to do for the bonus EP is I'm taking the track Genuflection, and I am kind of creating an ambient techno sort of thing with it, where I'm going through lots of different moods based on some of the melodic and rhythmic ideas in Genuflection, and carrying that out over 25 or 30 minutes.
Oh, very nice.
Oh, nice.
And so I'm hopefully going to honor my my inspiration in those 2 composers a little bit better that way, in some ways, not completely, but in some ways. What I thought I would do is that and I have done, is I've asked a number of my friends who are writers to take the idea of genuflect or genuflection as a writing prompt and compose a few lines about genuflect or whatever, and then speak them into a microphone or record them and send them to me. So what I'm going to be doing is not only am I going to be stretching out that track and bringing it into a bunch of different directions, but a lot of the music for that track on the bonus album, that one track, Genuflection, is going to include the voices of a lot of my friends who are writers who are speaking poetry. And some of the music is going to be formulated around the energy they bring through their words and how they read them. So,
neat.
And one of the things that led me to trying to explore this with these writers is that they're also very accustomed to recording their voices, and I like their voices too. I like the sounds of their voices and the way they read and the cadence of whatever they do. So
yeah, and you know, and in your, and particularly in the track we're writing out on, you're crossing over. You're really becoming a hybrid artist in that sense.
I didn't want to read more poetry necessarily on this album because I'd done that in 2 tracks on Nail. So I thought I would do a short story.
Yeah.
You know, instead, though it may come across as a poem, but it's really meant to be a short story. So it's not a completely original idea, but it is not a very common idea. So I thought I'd go with that.
But I thought, you know, just symbolically, it is in a way your second voice, isn't it? You know? Yeah,
in a lot of ways. Yeah, absolutely.
In a lot of ways, it's your second voice. So it is very fitting. So it doesn't have to be original, I think. I think that's a mistake to try to be original.
It's hard.
You know, it just has to be meaningful. And I think you have been very successful in making that whole idea of a second voice very meaningful throughout this album. I really want to congratulate you on that. It's a, you know, like I said in an email to you, it's another couple of steps up the ladder from Nail, and Nail was already quite an advancement, I thought, in your development. But
Thank you.
I think this is a very remarkable album.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you. I hope people enjoy it. And if people connect with it, that's great. And it seems like, you know, you guys have in some ways. So
definitely.
It really makes me happy.
Definitely.
Makes me happy,
and let's hope that for a good number of people, your album becomes a siren call for them to give expression to their second voice. Whether that it be in poetry, whether that be in visual arts, whether that be in music, or whether that be in any facets of their lives. I think, you know, let's think of your album as a siren call, as a way of just seducing people into expressing their second voice. How about that?
That's great. I hope they don't drown.
No rocks involved, hopefully, with this.
Maybe stay on land.
I'm sorry, Kees, go ahead.
No, I said maybe stay on the land for a little while.
Yeah, stay on the land. Put your toe in first. Yeah. But thanks for having me. I really appreciate this, and I appreciate the promotion, and not only that, but how thoughtful the discussion was from your perspective, both of you. You know, how you drag things out of me that I don't even recognize, you know, as, and I say, yeah, you're right about that. I never thought, you know, and it just goes to show that, you know, I do appreciate that deep listening that you guys do.
Oh,
too.
Good. Enjoyed it.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun. And I think for you too, right, Kim?
Yeah, definitely. I enjoyed it a lot. And I really enjoyed talking to you about how your composition is natural. You're more in the moment. You're not thinking about these themes, but yet these themes come naturally together for you. So I'm glad that we could talk about it and kind of draw those out and draw attention to it, because it's just happening within you. Again, it's your first voice and now giving expression in your second voice. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Hey, Kim, you want to take us out? You want to ride us out?
I will go ahead and let you do that, Kees. I'm going to let you be the voice of this podcast.
Why don't I do it?
There you go.
Why don't I do it? I'll do it. Thank you, everybody, for listening. This is, we've been speaking with Isotherme for the past hour and a billion about his new album, Silence of the Second Voice, and we're going to ride out on a track called L'Enfant du Milieu. Thank you for listening. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, bye.
I'm so used to doing it myself, so I might as well. Karis glanced at her big brother. She observed the way Will's breathing and grinding of his teeth made his temples expand and contract, as if he were a fish with furry blonde gills. She admired his concentration, and Kara sat fidgeting with her brown hair at the dining room table across from Will, who was making yet another erasure to the kids' crossword from yesterday's news. What's a 4-letter word for pain? Will asked himself. Antelope, Kara shouted. I saw a show on TV, and these men were hunting antelope. It looked painful. Will sneered. Antelope has more than 4 letters. Can't you see that? Karis continued stroking her hair with a toy comb, occasionally eyeing her reflection in the window to assess the folly. Does it really start with an A? If it started with H, it could be hurting, Karis offered. What? Snapped Will. You don't know anything. I think Peter is crying in the kitchen. Did Mom change his diaper when he woke up? Karis bit her bottom lip and twirled her hair between 2 fingers. I can't think with you here bugging me. Will stood and collected his pencil and eraser as he headed for the door. Mom, Karis wants to help you. Leaving the dining room, he mumbled. 7 down, A common shape of a stop sign. 7 letters. The 3rd letter is T. Will's footsteps faded as he ambled further down the hallway toward his bedroom. Karis heard his bedroom door shut, just barely, over the crying of her toddler brother Peter, who was either hungry or was packing a full load. Catching another glance of her reflection in the dining room window, Karis knelt before the cold square panes and gazed into the dark evening outside. She stuck her nose against the window and slowly backed away, and with each inch in reverse, the blackness of twilight gave way to the outline of her face, the shape of her chin, the gauze of her 2 eyes peering into the glass. She puckered her lips into a kiss and then exhaled, fogging up the window and blurring her distorted mirror image further, and with one final breath, Karis made her likeness in the glass disappear, overrun by clouds of dark condensation, as if she were now part of the unsettled night. She rose to her feet and slowly walked away, exiting the dining room, and she progressed through the hallway. Karis's eyes widened and her thoughts blazed, her lips curled into a grin, and her heart began to sprint. Karis stopped outside Will's bedroom and knocked. Yeah, who is it? Will sneered. Can I come in? I have something to tell you. Will's throat cleared from behind the door. No, I'm not changing Peter again. Your turn. Karis turned the doorknob and opened just enough to place her head inside Will's bedroom. Will looked up at her. Their gazes locked, yet their tongues remained still, silent. She looked down at him. Will looked up to her. For once in her life, he looked up to her.